Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're looking right past all that gleaming marble and gold of the ancient Roman Empire to uncover something honestly way more fascinating, the everyday plastic of antiquity. We're going to explore how the ancient Romans ingeniously took biological waste, specifically bone and antler, and turned it into the totally indispensable everyday stuff of their lives, roughly between 100 BCE and 200 CE.
We've got a really great structured journey mapped out for us today. First up, raw materials, bone versus antler. Then, a chronological guide to crafting. After that, we'll dive into the taxonomy, starting with grooming and textiles, followed by gaming and administration, and then furniture and the frontier. Finally, we'll wrap it all up with the value of ordinary bone. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Raw materials, bone versus antler. Okay, let's dive into this. When we picture ancient Rome, our minds usually go straight to monumental stone buildings or luxury metals, right? But to actually understand daily Roman life, we really need to reset our expectations and look at what ordinary folks literally held in their hands every single day.
First things first, bone and antler? Absolutely not the same thing. They aren't interchangeable at all. Standard bone came from the really dense long bone shafts of large mammals, like cattle and horses. This gave craftsmen these perfect workable tubes to create straight objects. Antler, on the other hand, is an osseous outgrowth from deer. The Romans loved it specifically because it's incredibly tough and elastic, which makes it absolutely ideal for things that take a beating, like handles or combs. And what's wild is that at archaeological sites like Augusta Raurica, we can see that Roman craftsmen weren't just scavenging whatever was lying around. No, they were highly deliberate. They selectively hunted down specific equine and cattle bones for very specific tools.
And hey, let's clear up a massive myth right now. People constantly lump horn in with bone and antler, but horn is actually a keratinous, modified skin tissue. It's way closer to your fingernails than it is to actual bone. And because of that, it decays super fast and barely survives in the archaeological record. So while it might seem totally invisible to us today compared to bone, all the historical evidence tells us they used it all the time.
Section 2. Chronological Guide to Crafting. So how exactly did a discarded animal part become a sleek household tool? Let's trace the material biography of a bone, literally following it step by step from the butcher's block straight into the artisan's workshop.
Let's walk through this chronological pipeline. Day 1 is procurement, which basically meant gathering butchery and kitchen refuse from the local meat economy. Then comes Day 2, degreasing. And look, do not romanticize this step. It was a filthy, incredibly smelly process of boiling the bone just to extract the marrow and grease so it would be stable enough to work with. Day 3 is blanking, where those long bones are aggressively sawn into straight strips. Then we hit shaping, where craftsmen would carve or lathe-turn the actual object. And finally, finishing, polishing that piece until it achieved a stunning, glossy white surface.
Now, archaeologists basically act like crime scene investigators to decode this process today. They read the traces left behind on the objects. For example, if a piece was turned on a lathe, it leaves very specific markers, like concentric bands and strict axial symmetry. When we see that, we instantly know the object was serially or mass-produced. Hand-carved items, on the flip side, show localized facets and slightly irregular shapes. Literally every saw mark or truncated end is like a diagnostic playbook for reading an ancient workshop's trash.
To really ground this technical sequence, think about the making of a super common, everyday object, the gaming die. The craftsman starts by cutting a small, cubic blank from a dense chunk of bone. Next, they true the faces, making sure the cube is perfectly flat, which, is pretty crucial if you want a fair game. After that, they carefully drill or incise the markings, the pips, right into the sides. And finally, a thorough polish gives it that smooth, satisfying feel we all recognize. It's just a highly efficient, practical process for making something everyone used.
Section 3. Taxonomy, Grooming and Textiles. All right, we are pivoting now from our chronological timeline into our taxonomical guide. Let's see how this intense manufacturing process built out an incredibly diverse catalog of objects, starting with personal grooming and textiles.
It is absolutely time to bust a really persistent modern myth. When a lot of people see delicate, pointed ancient bone pins, their first instinct is to just label all of them as female jewelry. And sure, those highly ornate hairpins carved with little busts or hands were definitely used for complex hairstyles. But a huge portion of plain pins, needles, and bodkins, those were hardworking tools, utterly essential for domestic textile labor. We also find things like ligula, these tiny little spoons used for mixing cosmetics or even as ear picks, and composite combs. It just proves that bone was totally central to both personal vanity and intense household chores.
21.4. That is the length, in centimeters, of a massive, completely plain bone pin currently held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I mean, just picture that size. It beautifully demonstrates not only the sheer scale of the objects these artisans could pull out of a single long bone, but also the crazy level of standardization they achieved across the empire. Whether you lived in Roman Britain or Cyprus, these highly practical, standardized shapes were just readily available to you.
Section 4. Taxonomy, Gaming and Administration. Let's step away from the vanity table and the weaving loom for a second and head over to the noisy local tavern and the quiet administrator's desk.
Here, we're looking at a massive industry entirely dedicated to leisure and record keeping. Bone was just the perfect material to mass-produce super cheap game counters and dice. And this is a huge deal, because it means games of chance weren't just some luxury for the wealthy elite. They were universally accessible. Everyone from tavern regulars to soldiers stationed out on the frontier was playing. And right alongside those game pieces, we find bone styli used by clerks for scratching notes into wax tablets and little bone tesserae used basically as administrative labels.
Section 5. Taxonomy, Furniture and Frontier. Let's shift our focus once more, zooming out from those small, handheld items to the larger household environment, and all the way out to the heavily guarded, distant edges of the Roman military frontier.
Bone wasn't just for small tools, it was heavily integrated into larger composite artifacts too. It provided these gorgeous decorative plaques and inlays for wooden caskets and couches. We also constantly see antler being chosen for really tough knife handles. Out in the military forts, standard issue soldier equipment actually included bone gaming and grooming tools. Now, you might occasionally hear about archaeologists finding bone arrowheads at Dacian sites like Pearlissum, but it's super important to understand those are highly unusual. They were likely tied to very specific Eastern archery units. For the standard Roman military, the arrowhead absolutely remained iron, not bone.
Section 6. The value of ordinary bone. All right, this brings us to the climax of our explainer. When we step back and look at all these pins, styli, hinges, and dice, what's the broader economic reality of this massive, interconnected industry?
The source material hits the nail on the head here. It says selection of suitable bones was a technical choice embedded in urban and military economies. That totally crushes this romanticized, folksy idea of peasant handicraft happening casually around a campfire. Boneworking was a deliberate, incredibly efficient, and deeply integrated urban industry. It cleverly took the food supply and slaughterhouse waste and piped it directly into mass manufacturing. Which leads me to ask you a direct question. When you walk through a museum today and you're looking at a display of those beautiful glossy white Roman artifacts, is every single one of those pieces actually made of luxury imported ivory?
The answer is a resounding no. Most of those highly polished white artifacts are quite simply just everyday bone. Ivory was an incredibly rare, high-status luxury material. The true superpower of bone was its ability to convincingly mimic that expensive ivory once it was properly degreased and polished. It gave the masses access to cheap, fashionable goods, completely democratizing attractive daily items. Ultimately, boneworking was the ancient world's ultimate recycling program. It literally transformed biological waste into the standard material environment of daily Roman life. The reality is, it's these cheap, ordinary pins, dice, and handles that tell us vastly more about how real Romans lived, worked, and played than those rare, isolated luxury ivories ever could.
We've seen how this ancient plastic built the Roman world from the ground up, but I really want to leave you with a provocative thought to ponder. When archaeologists dig up our civilization 2 millennia from now, what modern disposable materials will have survived to tell the true everyday story of our lives, just like this remarkably resilient Roman bone has done for them? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the everyday objects around you.
Via rectissima